want to make sure because the Wi-Fi is a bit bad on our end, and we would want like love to turn on the camera, but yeah.
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay, okay, nice. You know what? Maybe I'll turn on my camera. Okay,
All right.
my pronouns are she, her, and I prefer verbal POI. I am a Chinese, and let's say that I'm so sleep deprived, but I can't really go to sleep because I still need to work. This is the reality in which I, as a young adult living in China, has to constantly opt into the hustle culture, in which we tell you that's inherently harmful, inherently toxic, and something that will never change if you never do something about it, if you never fight the extreme with the other end of extreme. Today, in my speech, I'll give you like two key pieces of framing before moving on to my two arguments to why we tell you and why we justify the fact that I, as a young adult, would actually embrace touching the fish, right? So, firstly, the first key piece of framing here is that what is the status quo within China? How does this look like, and why would we be more likely to opt into touching the fish? Because you first need to understand that within China, the hustle culture is very prominent. This means that you're constantly working overtime. This means that you're doing more than your peers, and that is something that is always outcompeting yourself. You always have to outcompete the next person who tries to outcompete you. This leads to what we call a really toxic culture, where you're constantly having to hustle, where you're constantly having to work, in which we tell you that you may think, and you may start to think that, oh, taking a break means that I'm being unproductive, which means that I am not a successful person. And the reason why we say that this is more likely to be true, because the narrative within China right now is so heavy to be, you need to hustle, because what the older generation has been pushing onto this younger generation is the fact that for you to be a successful person, is for you to always hustle, for you to always work. Oh, like, I think you will get what you mean. And what we tell you that this results to is that the fact that there will be a mental strain on these individuals, not just mentally, just physically at the same time. Because when you're constantly working without having or feeling validated that you can take a break, you will end up feeling that, oh, I can't take a break, I can't do anything, and you're trapped in this cycle. The second key pieces of framing here is that we tell you that what is inherently my goal as a young adult, and why is it more likely that we embrace this type of thing. I think the first thing you need to understand is that what does embracing the fish like kind of look like? I tell you that it's like sort of doing the bare minimum, and technically that bare minimum within China may look like you're not doing anything, you're not doing enough. But it's inherently because within China, hustling culture has become so strong to the fact where something like doing the bare basic minimum of your job, such as just not working overtime, seems like you're not doing enough. And so we tell you that why would this be under the interest of like a young person would be one, I think, to be challenging the system. Because I say that the narrative now amongst many young Chinese individuals is that on Douyin and like on TikTok, not TikTok, on like on Douyin or Xiaohongshu, those kind of social media, people are starting to question, people are starting to wonder if it's really necessary for you to work so much. Because understand that right now, I think when the world is globalizing, where these individuals or like these Chinese individuals are seeing how people outside of the world like do exams in comparison to something like the Gaokao, they start to realize that there is a stark difference, and they start to realize that why is there such a stark, why are they pushing themselves so much in order to do something like just an exam? Imagine that, but on the workplace culture. And so we tell you that right now, liberalizing this idea of the hustle culture has already been on the rise, something that's already been very prominent. I think as a young adult, I'll be more willing to opt into something that is upcoming and is uprising. And I think something that we want to clarify here is that art needs to show why this is not within the interest of this young adult, and why the other alternative or something like opting into the hustle culture is better than opting into something like embracing the fish, in which we tell you later on of why it's more beneficial to sort of like my mental health and everything as a whole. So I first I'll take you later. I think the first argument here is that we tell you that by opting into something like embracing the fish or like touching the fish, it encourages this work-life balance that is already missing from China. So two layers of analysis here. Firstly, what is the problem with it now? We tell you that right now the narrative is that you must hustle in order to be a successful person. That is something that's never ending, and the cycle that will always continue, because when you try to one up the other, the narrative here is that the other person, your peer, would try to one up you. So this leads to you also having to one up them, and that's something you can never escape of, because you always have to try to one up because of how your status is so directly related to you having having to hustle so much. And therefore, what this results in is that we tell you that you start to neglect your own personal time, because now it isn't your own time. It isn't like what you mean, what it is to be a human, which is to take breaks, but it's more of that you need to hustle in order to be this productive human, this productive employee, in which we tell you that's inherently harmful on your health. Because consequently, as a result, when you try to neglect your health in order to hustle for so much, you not only put a pressure on yourself, you must hustle all the time. Not only is mental strain, you must exceed your current strength. What we tell you is that when you try to overwork what your body tells you that you cannot, you physically will also start to feel the impacts. You physically will start to feel the sleep deprivation. And we tell you that leads to a life that's inherently just a lower quality, because you're sacrificing so much of your time just regarding to your work, and you start to miss out your personal time, like your hobbies or what you want to personally do. In which we tell you that more likely be opting into like having to work, and that's something that you will inherently miss out, right? So on the second analysis here, how do we solve this as a person that's going to opt into embracing the fish? So firstly, to justify why we're fighting the extreme is that the only way for you to actually realize on how serious the consequences is, or how bad or how extended the degree of overexerting yourself first, is that you need to first compare it with another extreme on the side, in which we tell you that when you start to do something like that amongst your peers, we tell you that as a result of it, it's more likely for your peers to start to question on and maybe judge you and maybe like criticize on what you're doing. But that criticization is an actual good thing, because what this leads to is that you yourself, when people are starting to wonder why the hell are you doing this results in more people starting to question the bigger picture, in which we tell you that it's more likely for them to start to wonder on the bigger issues. For example, why am I actually working so hard to this? Why is this individual's working so little? What is wrong with them? Which we tell you that is inherently beneficial when you want to challenge something like the system. And we tell you that maybe on our best case scenario, when we're able to reform policies because people are starting to opt out of work, are starting to do the bare minimum, in which the government wonder why is the productivity levels not as high as it was before. We tell that even on a worst case, when people are just merely aware, when people are just criticizing you, right? At least you as a person have a control over your life. At least you yourself have some reassurance, or some, at least you're not having that same mental stream as you were before opting into your, yeah, I'll take your POI. Oh, sorry, it's already 6. So the second argument here, I will tell you that within the exploitative nature, this is something that we need, because right now the issue is that China doesn't really have that many labor unions, which leads to them having unpaid overtime and overwork, which is much more likely because they're working in, for example, those those like really big factories. And really tell you that even I, as an individual who's working overtime, there is no point of me working overtime if I'm never getting the pay that I am supposed to be getting. And we should tell you that I, as an individual, doesn't really want to opt into this, because what's the point of over exhausting myself for something with a benefit that cannot manifest simply because of the lack of regulations in which China has right now? And inherently, as a result of that, we tell you that it's far better for us, for I as an individual, to opt into and touching the fish. Therefore, so proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Prime Minister, for the fine speech calling upon leader of opposition. Here, here.
Just to confirm, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Hello, look, both government and opposition agree on the fact that the current job industry, and especially in Central Asia, countries like China and Japan, is very prominent and is very burdening, especially towards workers that work in 9 to 5. So the debate here isn't about the fact that the workload is bad, or the fact that a hustle culture in and of itself is bad. It's whether or not which side can provide to you a proper way to rebel and a proper way to cater towards these suffering workers. Before I move on, I want to begin with some responses to engage with opening government. Firstly, she mentioned that they are encouraging work-life balance. I don't really see how this is true, because if all you're doing is going to the toilet and scrolling on social media, if all you're doing is delaying your work, and your work that's being delayed is compounding over time with even more work, especially given the example of the context of this debate inside of China, where the workload is very grueling, I don't really see how this will make your life easier just for a short 5-minute break. Secondly, they tell you that they are trying to challenge the system. I don't really see how this is able to challenge the system. Not only are you doing very discrete things that don't matter, but it mentions in the info slide itself the whole point of touching the fish is to not get caught by your employer. So I don't see how not being seen can make a change or counts as a form of protest. Moving on to some framing that Prime Minister seemed to miss. They did not characterize young adults. Sure, they told the goal, but what young adults look like in this debate, mostly in their early 20s to 30s, meaning that their mental health is probably not all that strong or not as developed as more experienced workers. It also looks like they are more likely new to having a job unless they had some part-time jobs in the past, meaning that this new or this very grueling workload is very new to them and they might have a hard time adjusting. Secondly, touching some examples of touching the fish or what touching the fish looks like, the effects of touching the fish in this debate look like decreased productivity. You're delaying your work and you're slacking off. You're giving yourself less motivation and pushing yourself less to just get it over with. Secondly, you're lowering the chances of you getting promoted or even getting experience or connections. If your boss doesn't see you being as prominent in the workplace as other people, especially if you're a young person, which is very important for you to build experience for your future jobs, this is when we say you have less opportunity in the future. But what are the metrics of this debate that Prime Minister did not even touch on? We tell you that if you want to win in this debate, there are three things that you need to win on. Firstly, which side is able to cater more towards workers' mental health? Secondly, which side is able to protest effectively and provide overall satisfaction towards workers? And lastly, which side is able to provide most opportunity or most potential through, for example, let's just say you get connections in the workplace. But the counter narrative that we provide to you as opening opposition is we will protest properly. What does this look like? It looks like maybe discussing with your boss. It looks like protesting with your entire office to not come to work after your boss gave you a ton of work. We both agree that the hustle culture is terrible inside of Japan. We both agree that the hustle culture is terrible inside of China, inside of Central Asia as a whole, and it's a problem that even the government is recognizing. So we tell you that with these small measly steps that don't have any effect, then you cannot achieve proper change and get all the benefits that you gave on your side, which are not even mutually exclusive at the end of the day. But why do you want proper protest? Let me make a comparison to you. On opposition, protests look like demanding policies to lighten the workload or demanding policies for parental leave so that they can go pick up their children from school and spend time with their family. But what government looks like is sneaking away and delaying your work. Delaying work is going to compound over time because the work is constantly going on, as mentioned in the prominently grueling workload of China that even Prime Minister mentions accepts. Moving on to my first argument there. It's about how physical protests can cater more effectively towards these workers. Why is this necessarily true? We tell you that firstly, we're able to achieve policies to lighten the workload. We are able to achieve policies to lighten the workload and help them do more work effectively. For example, Japan recently got the policy for parental leave to make up for declining birth rates. Now, even though this was firstly made by their own government and not their own protest, and even if this is in Japan, we can take this example to see that this is only done by the government. Imagine what workers can do if the victims of this bullying workload to voice out themselves. Secondly, we tell you that it gives bosses an incentive to cater towards their workers, to make sure that their workers are doing the most work that they can. What does this look like? There are two scenarios that this can look like. For example, let's just say that their boss wants to earn the respect of their workers so that they can do more work, or they are more likely to agree with that boss. Then we say that this is one of the ways that they can do this, to lightening their workload and supporting them. But even if they're not aiming for respect or cooperation from their employees, we tell you that it's still important because suicide rates are going up because the grueling workload of Central Asia and most importantly China is causing a lot of mental stress and to some point suicidal or no motivation. So we tell you that bosses have an incentive whether they like their employees or not. But why is it necessarily good? We tell you that when we're able to invoke these policies, you can get proper change. People can spend more time with their families. People can get more opportunities. When people have more opportunities, they can get more jobs in the future. But why is it so important? Firstly, in terms of effectiveness, we tell you that people have a better mental health. This is when they're able to do more work. So the comparative that we provide to you is that in opposition side, before I move on, any of your hands. 3, 2, 1. So why is this so important? Firstly, we tell you that we are actually able to challenge the system while still retaining some results, which is the entire point of this debate at the end of the day. The whole point of this debate is to rebel and cater towards it. The whole point of this debate is to rebel against the hustle culture, the intense hustle culture in South Central Asia, and actually try to challenge the system, which is only achievable on the opposition side because we actually voice out, we actually tell the higher ups what's going on and why we deserve change. But secondly, why does government necessarily take over? But this is the whole reason why government takes over. This is the whole reason why opposition takes over government, and why closing opposition will not win over opening because they won't be able to provide a new counter narrative. Or we tell you that their effects or arguments are less likely to be as effective or as prominent as ours. For all those reasons, vote for opening up.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that fine speech. To continue on with the debate calling upon Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Turn on camera, please. Oh. Push this back a bit. Oh. Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yep, audible and visible.
Okay, that's good. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What is exactly the proper way to rebel in order to get social reformation and social change as a whole? Firstly, what opposition has told you so far is in fact not what can or is feasible for these individuals to do as of now. Simply because number one, it is really hard to discuss with your boss because you as a sole individual will not be listened to. And number two, because probably everyone around you is also a hustler and exhausting themselves out with workloads of projects and other things such as that. Therefore, it's really hard to get bosses, your boss or your bigger companies to actually listen to you in order to get social reformation on your side. The thing is here, in order to achieve policies that can actually help workers on our side, we actually have and we provide an incentive for employers to actually turn towards systematic change by improving the working conditions of their employees in order to actually not delay productivity or lower or any other such things. If they actually want their workers to produce like best results and actually work effectively and productively in order to help the company they work at and other things such as that. They don't want their workers to slack off and other things such as that. So by doing this in the first place, we're actually providing a tangible incentive for these employees to actually change, to actually work towards this and do something. Like my first speaker has already told you, there's no I think she told you there's no trade unions in China right now or other things such as that. So it's really hard as an individual employee to actually stand up to your boss and to actually talk it out because they won't listen to you when all your other co-workers already tried their best and are such big hustlers and other things such as that. So it's really hard as an individual to rebel. So I've completely disproved opposition's whole point. And now moving on to another point. The thing here is, as an individual, when you start to change, when you tell them that you don't want to work overtime, we're not exactly shirking off too much work. We're just sticking strictly towards the legal boundaries. We're not working overtime. We're not taking any more. We're staying towards what we want. We may take more breaks, and it's a way to relieve our mental stress and exhaustion and other things. This actually exposes the flaws within the system as of now. And we're actually telling our bosses straight up that we are against this whole concept and against this whole idea that we all as employees should work day and night to do something. POI.
If you see that their bosses don't want their employees to slack off, firstly, that's not mutually exclusive. It also happens on our side. But it's not even effective and change can happen because they don't even know that their workers are slacking off. So how does this still stand?
I'm sorry, the mic is really bad. Audio quality is really bad. Could you repeat that?
All right. You said that the boss, they don't want their employees to slack off. So in turn, they will cater to their employees. But we say that is not entirely true because they don't know in the influ side say so. So what's your response?
What I'm getting from your POI is that the bosses don't know that these employees are overworked, and therefore, when these employees stand out, the bosses will actually listen to them. However, this is completely untrue, like my first speaker has already said, because you see videos of these people in factories, thousands of them lined up working day and night over to produce machinery, iPhones, and other things such as that. Therefore, the people who are employing them already are fully aware of all the conditions and working conditions they are going under. And we already know that these individuals can be easily replaced. In the second most populated country in the world, of course, there's going to be millions of other people looking for the same job opportunities as you. It's really competitive. It's not like Japan and their declining birth rates, which actually push the government to have more parental leave policies in workforces. That's because Japan has declining birth rates. China does not have declining birth rates. In fact, it's overpopulated. Therefore, these employers really do not care whether you as an individual or what you feel as an individual. The reason being is simply because you can get replaced easily. Henceforth, why? If we actually have and we opt into touching the fish as a societal thing, as a societal impact and something everyone opts into, this means that these employers will actually now be forced to actually listen to not only you as an individual, but everyone else who's also affected by this concept, which is really bad. And we can actually, as we escalate this, you will now have millions of like burnout young adults, which actually leads to societal collapse if this continues this way. And by protesting in this manner, instead of like subjecting yourself to mental stress or sleep deprivation, which mentally and physically degrades you as an individual because you can't handle waking up early in the morning and other things like that, we are actually outright telling your employer that you cannot and you will not take this anymore. When this thing comes into play, we actually allow people to catch a breath. It's not even exaggerating. We're not even exaggerating the work conditions in China right now. We're actually putting it straight forth. And this is actually is what is happening. This is so legitimately true because the reason being another reason why people cannot do this in China right now is not only because of no trade unions, it's because they have no trade unions, they're unable to carry out things such as strikes, which actually helps individuals as a collective group negotiate like wages and working sanctions, regulate relationships between their employers and employees, take collective action to enforce like terms of collective bargaining and other things like that, raise new demands or help settle grievances and other things. They can't do all these things simply because they don't have trade unions and other things as that, simply because they're so restricted. They don't have the freedom to do whatever they want, simply because they're confined to such a toxic environment. And we as side government actually acknowledge this. And because we want these individuals to embrace touching the fish, we're actively saying that these individuals now have a chance to protest actively against all these things. Because if everyone opts into touching the fish, we are actually now going towards a path of protesting and creating societal change and societal reformation. And to weigh a bit of both sides over here, government on their side still have people who are following the system, who are still confined to the bounds of this toxic environment. However, on our side, we provide a small opportunity as an individual. If a collective group comes together and does this, we provide a larger incentive for these employers to actually change, to actually work towards systematic change, because now they are forced to acknowledge this is happening within their working conditions as an employer, and they cannot simply just ignore it. They actually have to do something about it because it's affecting them, it's affecting their profits as the employer themselves. Therefore, they can't just turn a blind eye to it, turn a blind eye to all the factory workers who are working within the factories. Because if everyone does this, if everyone opts into touching the fish, they are forced to actually acknowledge this, they are forced to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that fine speech. To continue on with the debate, calling upon Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I find it very laughable for side government to actually rebut on examples instead of actually engaging with our two main arguments that they try to brush off under the mat. Firstly, let me go on towards my rebuttals. I have 3 today, and why our argument still stands, and therefore show you, judge, why our module of alternative is way more better than touching the fish, right? So firstly, the first response coming from second speaker of government, they talk about, oh, students can just talk with their bosses because they are still young workers. We are telling that this is very a narrowing response coming from government, because this is essentially rebutting on examples. We are telling you that they should obviously gang up with numbers, huge numbers, and actually addresses the matter even then. We are telling you that they should gang up and formally protest it, and that is our alternative. I think that this is better because you can actually talk with your boss and you can negotiate with your boss. Even with numbers, we can tell you that this will be more intimidating instead of doing it discreetly. And it is already mentioned in info slides that the workers who would be doing this practice of touching the fish won't actually be caught, right? So we can say that it is safe to assume that even if the boss is aware of it, they would be seen as slacking off. And I'll be explaining that later in my third rebuttal. Second rebuttal, they talk about, oh, boss, they don't want their employees to slack off. Therefore, they would cater to their employees. We tell you that boss don't actually know that their employees are actually doing this because they are discreetly doing it without getting caught, right? So what actually happens? Their response is basically that, oh, in manufacturing companies, they have CCTVs and all. But we're telling you that they still go against the info slide, right? Please read the info slide. It said that it will be done without getting caught, and that is why it is not true at all. And even if this is true, even if the bosses are aware of what their workers are doing, we are telling that they would just fire the worker instead of actually like cater to that worker. Why? Because firstly, it is an individualistic act. Your boss would see the individual trying to touch the fish alone instead of gagging up with their colleagues and co-workers and see that person and just gonna fire him. Secondly, you would seen as a slacking off, and what you would be seen as slacking off, and this would materialize in my later on argument. I will be explaining later the how. Secondly, even if that also exists on our side, when bosses are aware of the conditions and the stresses of hustle culture, this is when it is way more effective on our side. Like explained before, we are going to protest physically and addresses the matter directly, therefore negotiation and actually real change. Yeah, sure.
If protesting does not work, why is opting into the only option of hustle culture still better for my mental health as a person?
We are telling you that it is better for protesting because you can actually achieve real change. And we need to understand that touching the fish is not actually achieving real change. Yeah, sure, you're going to protest against the system, but you are not really getting any change. The employees doesn't notice you, the boss doesn't notice you. You are only getting like what, 15 minutes a break every other day because you spend like 5 minutes break scrolling TikTok in the bathroom. Nobody's going to notice your efforts. Therefore, no real change in the system. Therefore, you don't even tackle the underlying problem of hustle culture at the end of the day. We are telling that on our model, we are against hustle culture, and I will tell you that why our entire arguments will materialize. But before that, let me prove to you why is it so important that my previous speaker argument, right? Their entire argument is basically that physical protest caters more effectively. Why is it so important? We are telling that this is healthier, more productive towards workers. Why? Because bosses can actually cater and actually address the problem directly. When a bunch of, like, for example, 50% of the company wants to strike the boss, wants to actually protest against the boss formally, we are telling that they could actually talk about their problems. For example, burnout, rigid timetable of work. They can tell you that, oh, I'm not actually happy with my work. Let me get some slack, right? So what would happen? The boss can actually cater towards them because the boss noticed them. They notice the problem inside the workspace, inside the company. And we tell you that the companies have an incentive to actually keep most of their workers because their workers is not entirely like replaceable, right? Even with the strong job market in China, we are telling you that it is a very valuable asset, right? So we tell you that companies actually have incentive to cater towards them. Therefore, why is it so important on our side? Touching the fish doesn't solve this problem because bosses don't notice you again and again. Going on towards the second argument, even if bosses notice you, we tell you that this rips off opportunities of people that actually touches the fish. What happens? Firstly, we are telling you that what happens on site government. Firstly, when bosses notice this, one thing, they are going to fire you because you are touching the fish. Secondly, this is an individualistic act, like explained from my rebuttal. And even then, you are not going to get promotions. And this is a very important thing. in your early work life, we are telling that this is the time where you get the most energy, the most potential to actually climb up the socio-economic ladder. We are telling you that when you are touching the fish, you are not going to stand up. You are not going to stand out in the workspace. You are going to just seen as just another one in the system, just another guy in the workspace. You are not going to get more salary. You are not going to get more flexible work time. You are not going to be the boss in the future. You are not going to get promoted. What happens in our side of the house? We tell you that when you actually try to come up with your colleagues and actually protest against the hustle culture and directly go to a formal protest, because we can tell you that people are going to gang up because this is a very major problem in China. Even government concede to this, right? So we are telling that when bosses know that, oh, 50% of the company is going to protest against me, this is a real problem, therefore I need to cater to it very much. So this is when we actually try to challenge the system. And one side government actually tries to sweep this under the mat without even comparing the two modules. It is very laughable. How can you claim your own benefits without disproving ours? And how can you make assumptions that, oh, bosses will actually be aware because of like CCTV? It's a very, very narrow debate. So at the end of the day, what do? We prove you two things. We are against hustle culture and we actually solve it at the end of the day. Secondly, we try to challenge the system and we can actually acquire results in which my previous speaker and my speech right now have already been proven. Thirdly, we actually prove to you why opposition doesn't win this debate, because we already compare every other metric of measurement in which we will win this debate. Which is, firstly, we actually tackle the underlying problem. Secondly, we cater towards the mental health of people. Thirdly, we actually give much more opportunities towards our employees. So at the end of the day, opposition can win. We bring the most case. Closing government can win. Opposition takes this debate. Closing opposition, they don't have any matter left to actually unfold of. We win this debate. Please vote for opening opposition. Sign names out.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for that fine speech. To start off the closing half of the debate, calling upon Member of Government. Here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, but there seems to be some kind of echo or something.
Yeah,
when
that
you're
was
talking.
it's okay now. Is it okay, right?
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
it's okay now.
I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, hustle culture forces workers to give extra effort without fair pay, destroy health, and creates unfair statement, especially in China, which now leads to my problem statement. The status quo right now, a lot of workers these days have been in critical health because of being overworked mentally and physically. And the problem with this, it affects the workers, or especially young adult like us, and a company into chasing or even getting any success, which now leads to my characterization. In the closing government views, young adult means are people in the age range of 19 to 21 years old or early 20s who are just starting out their work life without much experience. And touching the fish looks like us or young adult doing the bare minimum and a build that protests hustling work, which is a hustling culture that can bring a lot of negativity to workers. Which is why my mechanism is showing how by doing the bare minimum, bringing more, which is how by doing the bare minimum, we would bring more good than harm, especially to young adult like us who is just starting out our work life. And our burden is to prove that by embracing touching the fish brings more good than harm, especially for young adult, because in the end, this will impact, and the stakeholder here is us, workers or young adult who have just started working in China. So firstly, I would like to give my rebuttals. I have 2 rebuttals regarding the opposition. My first rebuttal is the opposition says how by hustling working, you can build more experience. But this is not true, because in the end, hustling working is working extra time, is overworking people or overworking young adults, and it actually weakens the workforce over time. And number 2, my reason is experience can be learned during normal working hours. Why do we need to work extra time to gain more experience when people started out working to gain experience? And another reason why I don't really understand about the opposition, they said about
protesting physically so the employment can see us. But why do you think your way of protesting is better? Because touching the fish is a way of protesting hustle culture when you're but slowly and like a little bit without employment knowing. But your way of protesting is physically, and you're saying about how employment can see you and about how the boss can see you. But when we protesting in the way of touching the fish, you say that we would get fired easily. But I think that protesting physically would make you get fired even faster and even leave more negative impact than by doing it slowly and surely. Now, my third reason is overworking won't really build experience, but it will just lead to us being burnt out. And burnout destroys skills when workers are too tired to even work. And healthy workers can build healthy workers can build more experience because we're actually healthy and we actually want to do it instead of us when we're mentally and physically not okay. So people for like us deserve fair pay for fair work, not endless overwork that won't even build you any experience because you're too tired to even focus. Now, my second argument is um, they say about how we're delaying work. And yes, this is true, but it's not really applicable because do you expect us as a young adult finishing our big and a lot of workload all in one go? Because we are in China. It's a country where our shift is a lot of work, especially for hustle worker who think that hustling is normal. Number two, by supporting and embracing touching the fish, we don't even need to take any breaks because we don't have to spend extra time or extra shift doing something, doing more work than we're supposed to. So, in the end, by embracing the fish, we would take less a break and let people catch a break because China is a country where a lot of people get overworked but they can't do anything about it. So us as a young adult should slowly start a protest by touching the fish because touching the fish is encouraging employees take a work as little as possible, not working at all, and like what the opposition say about the protesting physically. Now, I would like to quickly go to my argument. I have two arguments. My first argument is companies actually take advantage of us. Why is it true? Because hustle culture pressures us to work extra hours even if we don't want to. For example, the companies would see us as a vulnerable young adult without a stable income yet. So they would kind of like corrupt us into do extra work and think it's easier for us to do it. Now, number two, on why is it true? This is unfair because a bad image of us would be represented even though working the bare minimum is not wrong. So it's making other people look like, oh, they're only doing the bare minimum, so they're not a good worker, even though it's not wrong to do that. Because in the end, we're still doing what we are told to in our contract. So why do we need to work more to benefit the company when it doesn't even benefit us? Why is it important? Number one, we could risk losing our job or the fear of losing our work, especially as a young adult starting our corporate career. We're just starting out. Don't forget that. So, do you think by doing all this, it would bring more benefit? Because no, it would only just make us feel scared about losing our job if we don't work extra hours, which is not benefit for us. For example, we would get looked down upon, especially from the senior worker here in China. Now, why is it bad? Hustle culture can damage our health because long work hours cause stress, burnout, and serious health problems. Number two, on why is it bad? We could lose sleep, family time, and overall happiness due to unhealthy lifestyle. We are just a young adult. We want to spend time with our family while still managing a stable work career. Number three, life is more than just working all the time. And especially if it only benefits the company and not beneficial for us. My second argument is doing the bare minimum is not wrong. Why is it true? Number one, why do you think we would want to spend a lot of time on social media in the bathroom or always take a break or never work over a allotted shift? It's probably because you already get a lot of workload to do. That means that would lead us to take extreme measure. So if you already have a lot of work to do you really think overworking us would be better? No. Now, why is it important? Number one, do you think us having to hustle in our work and do more job will be beneficial for us? No, it would only lead to more problems and would only be beneficial for the company, which is why we should protest against this. Why is it bad? Why is it good doing the bare minimum? we'll balance our life and our professional work, so we get to have time for personal happiness. So in conclusion, this will, if we don't embrace this fish, it will only lead to unhealthy working lifestyle, especially to younger generation, because we are in the end young adults. Now, in conclusion, I've given you a complete and detailed case setup, and also a mechanism and burdens and the impact for the stakeholder. I have also given you two rebuttals with detail and explanation, and also two arguments that I've given an example and a lot of elaboration that can make the judge here easier to understand. In conclusion, that is why I, as a closing government, do believe that this house, as a young adult living in China, would embrace touching the fish. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of CA, for the fine speech. Calling upon Member of Opposition here.
I'll be taking POIs verbally. Alright, so I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, the reason why you're unable to achieve a work-life balance in the first place is due to things like rooted work culture oppression that happens in China. Yet both opening house have failed to explain why it exists in the first place. Two segments to my speech. Firstly, it's going to be providing you key responses in order to decimate the case of government. Secondly, it's going to be providing an extension argument in order to oppose the motion given today. Moving straight to responses, right? The sentiment shared by both government halves is that the fact that they claim it is actually they are able to provide a work-life balance on their side. Here's two reasons why we think that the entire sentiment is not true. Firstly, this balance is fundamentally unsustainable because it fails to address the root cause of overwork in the first place. The first reason is because the core problem is not individual burnout. It's the structural exploitation that is embedded in China's overall economic model. Understand that China's economic model is centered regarding becoming a trade-oriented economy, meaning to say that the government has to pressure these workers in order to work overtime, to pressure those workers because they need that mass production to export those products. That's why productivity is so important to the government. So that's the main reason that this structural exploitation exists in the first place. When these individuals privately disengage without actually collectively addressing the issue in the first place, what's going to happen is that institutional reform never is able to come forth. We'll be elaborating on that in our arguments. And the employees will still continue to demand excessive hours and are unable to get them. So, second thing, right? Second thing is that this passive form of coping mechanism, or that this practice in the first place, makes collective change nearly impossible in status quo. Here's why we think that if everyone retreats into personal survival strategies, no one builds the solidarity or the collective action necessary for people to demand institutional reforms in the first place. What does this mean? It means that oppressive work cultures continue to remain unchecked, that there is no accountability or responsibility taken by these corporations in the first place. Which is why government fails to address any of these claims, and that why they lose on that clash. Remember, true work-life change requires systemic change, not just individual behavior. Now, moving on to my first point of argumentation under the key headline of how touching the fish traps the worker in a cycle of hopelessness. Now, two things I'll be building. Firstly, proponents of touching the fish tend to frame it as a healthy coping mechanism that gives the employees a chance to prevent things like burnout in the first place. We see that it instead leads to long-term psychological costs that harm the individual on a large scale. Two reasons here. Firstly, embracing this engagement fosters a culture of learned helplessness. What does this mean? When these people realize that they simply cannot challenge the system and instead normalize these coping mechanisms like touching the fish, it internalizes the feeling of hopelessness among these people and the individual in this debate. They embrace that systemic oppression and begin to perceive themselves as being trapped in life without any hope for improvement, with no chance of satisfaction. So what does this mean, right? It means that then these workers will instead resort to those minimalized actions instead of trying to gather and collectively fight against the issue at hand. It means to say that collective things like riots or strikes do not occur as frequently on your side, because now people are busy being stuck in that cycle of coping mechanism. But before that, yeah, sure, one POI.
Why is it under a young person's interest to still opt into the toxic culture because systemic change cannot happen?
We're not saying that the person has to opt into that, the person wants to opt into that culture. What we're saying right here is that they have to find another alternative to go against that culture. This is not the right solution in order to go against in the first place. Don't distort what we're trying to say right here. So what are the impacts that happen on our side then? What happens is that it creates a deep feeling of nihilism and depression. When you're stuck here, right, there is no feeling of personal growth. They feel hopeless. They feel like they're trapped in this cycle, and it leads to things like a lack of motivation in the first place. It creates a deep feeling of nihilism, and we see that when this pressure combined with the already unstable work-life balance that happens inside the school, we see that the motivation of workers to continue working is already scarred. The fact is that workers are unable to perform as well as as before, because now they're pretty much stuck with things like extensive pressure. Now they have to deal with more issues that happen from a psychological standpoint. So why is it so important for us to take note in the first place? What happens when productivity decreases? We see that the CCP is an authoritarian government that isn't suddenly going to bend over to the people. What they're going to do instead is that they're going to impose harsher measures in order to force these workers into submission. What does this mean? It means like they're going to force these workers to undergo heavier control. They're going to continue monitoring these workers more. They're going to reduce the credit scores of these workers. And that's the way that they try to incentivize these workers to work, by forcing them, by pressuring them to work even harder. We see that it backfires on your side, because now the government will retaliate instead of actually trying to cater to the needs of these people. Now, moving on to the extension here. Under the key headline of touching the fish strengthens cultural exploitation on a large scale. Side OO, although what they said was partially true to an extent, they failed to provide any proper analysis as to why we prevail. No, thank you. We won't take any more. They don't actually provide you any substantial analysis as to why it actually has any change on their side. So, what's the premise of this extension? Firstly, from an external perspective, as we reiterated, touching the fish might look like a form of resistance against intense Chinese working culture that exploits cheap labor. However, we say in reality, it only prolongs the exploitation that these workers face on a daily basis. What's the reason behind this? Right? Firstly, is that you unintentionally normalize it as we stated before, because employees now disengage instead of combating against labor injustices. What do I mean by this? Right? Instead of actively applying pressure against these corporations in the form of things like strikes, labor unions, and trade unions, they instead are resorting to minimalized activities which individualize the problem, because there's no collective action that happens on their side when everybody is stuck doing their own thing. So what does this mean? Although it may reduce productivity, companies will continue to profit and receive revenue from those harsh policies. Remember, it's just a lack in the reduced productivity. Companies are not going to be that affected. However, the government will become mad at them. But even then, companies still won't actually cater to the needs of these workers. Remember, we already told you that the government is going to take harsher measures, which is why in all instances, it backfires on them. So with that being said, we say change never happens on their side. So go for side CO. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member of Opposition, for that fine speech to close off the government side of the debate, calling upon GovWhip. Here.
Hello, am I audible? Should I?
Yep, audible and visible.
Okay. I'll now be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. As a young adult, we have a lot in our life that should be enjoyed other than work. So I will be giving a summary of all of the houses. Firstly, I would like to give a few rebuttals from leader of opposition. Firstly, they mentioned how a young adult is from the early 30s, which is not really accurate, because and we've presented a better characterization for that definition. Secondly, they mentioned how it lowers how protesting by touching the fish will lower the chance of promotions, which will actually contradict their argument, because they mentioned how physical protest will make you lose work. That they've presented an alternative way by physical protest, but that will actually make you lose work. So if we compare the two impacts, lowering the chance of promotion is better than losing work as a whole. So secondly, and thirdly, the issue was protesting silently will not do anything, but that is not true because by protesting silently, it's actually one of the only ways we can do because China is a country where it's quite overpopulated and companies can just
UI.
I'm sorry cannot but companies will just stop can just fire them if they want because there's a lot of other people trying to get that opportunity that job opportunity. So protesting silently will be one of the only ways that we can do. Second, fourth, physical protests are more effective. This is also one of the issues, I guess. But remember, we are a young adult. We are in a very vulnerable position because we have not yet strength. We do not have a strong position in our job yet, as in the corporate world. So this could lead us to lose our job because we have a vulnerable, and so on and so forth. So to some next deputy leader of opposition mentioned how firework how protesting silently will fire workers, but that's not true because based on the info slide we will not be caught. Remember, so protesting silently will give us the benefit without giving and we will never be caught based on the info slide. Secondly,
UI.
deputy director of yes.
So if you admit that firstly China is overpopulated, how is it not true? Like everyone's facing the same problem, especially if it's overpopulated. So how are they less likely to come together and rebel if they're all facing the same problem?
We are talking about us as an individual, as a young adult. We're not really talking about us as a societal. That's not a part of our motion. Okay. Next, I will not be taking any more POIs. Next, the deputy leader of opposition mentioned how touching the fish will have no impact, and it's not true because we're not really necessarily protesting to make a big change against the whole company against for China as a whole because we are trying to make a change for us as an individual. And by protesting, silently, we will get a more balanced lifestyle because we are doing like what we are supposed to be doing at the bare minimum. So basically, to conclude, to conclude, OO mentioned how they are against hustle culture and says it's healthier to some and proposes an alternative way of protesting, which will not actually change us and change us as an individual. And they focus too much on a few issues and their way, and they also kind of misunderstand the motion because they are trying to change the company, but that's not the point because we are doing this as an individual and what will benefit us as an individual. And one company. So next, I will be rebutting against productivity. I will be first go to closing opposition, and they mentioned how productivity is important for corporation, but we are talking about us. Why would we care about what productivity matters to corporation? Because it won't affect us as an individual. Touching the fish will lead to helplessness but touching this is not true, and because we don't know why he even thinks this. He said a protest should happen differently to go against the culture, but failed to give an alternative way to go against us. So in the end, as opposing government way of protesting by touching the fish wins against the point he said, because it's a need of protest. Because if you are talking about how helplessness because we are already feeling helpless as is. So by protesting, we actually are going out of our way to go against that helplessness, and there's a reason why we have to do it. So more psychological impacts from doing the protest, but no, because we will actually benefit from it because we will do what our job needs to. And for example, 9 to 5, we are only going until 5. We are not working overtime, which means we have more time to do other things that will benefit us and will make us more happy. Then they talk. So in conclusion, they talk a lot about on trying to change and trying to achieve collective change, which is not relevant for us as an individual. Secondly, I will be summarizing opening government. So it will be improving work, which is not proof, and societal and they are trying to receive and they are trying to make a societal impact, and they take this motion as us as a as societal actions as they've insinuated in their speech. And they also says how encouraging they've encouraged work-life balance, but it's not really necessarily, and it clashes with ours, and we do it more, and we mention it with more in detail. And in conclusion, I believe that closing opposition should win, closing government should win this speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gafwit, for the fine speech. To end off the debate, calling upon opposition whip. Hear.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I bid to the wise panel of educators, meticulous timekeepers, worthy opponents, comrade on side of opposition, and everyone present witnessing this debate today. Firstly, in my speech today, I will be pointing out flaws in the cases made by the government side. Secondly, I'll be answering relevant questions that will prove to you why this debate should go to the closing opposition. Thirdly, I'll be doing both world comparisons. And finally, I'll be briefly summarizing the debate. Okay. So firstly, the Prime Minister said that embracing touching the fish encourages work-life balance. As my teammate has previously said in his speech, embracing touching the fish does not encourage work-life balance because your time will still be spent avoiding doing your work. As shown on the info slide, embracing touching the fish looks like watching your phone in the toilet. Do you really think that is a form of work-life balance? I think it isn't. Now, secondly, the Deputy Prime Minister said that it's hard to discuss with your boss because you alone will not be able to convince your boss. Okay, so obviously, I think this is true. And as my teammate has previously said, our goal is not to talk alone with your boss, but rather to do wide protests to get a lot of people to support that one matter. Please sit down. Second, the Deputy Prime Minister also said that embracing touching the fish will signal to employers that they are being overworked, thus leading to the employers reducing their working hours. We think this is an ineffective way because embracing touching the fish might only end up with you getting fired for not doing your work properly. It will not signal to your employers that you are being overworked. It will only signal that you are lazy and you are incapable of doing your work properly. Third, the Deputy Prime Minister said that touching the fish is a way of protesting against the current toxic environment. Although this is true that it is a form of protesting, it is an ineffective and inefficient form of protesting. Please sit down. As your outcome will not be achieved in a short time. Rather, it would, the closest that you'll get is a couple of years and maybe even more. Touching the fish is really not an effective way of protesting. And after that, the member of government mentioned
said that touching the fish will encourage doing minimal work. This is true, but it doesn't really look like minimal work because touching the fish is an unregulated way of not doing your work properly. Some people might spend more time during breaks. Then we also said that touching the fish will allow for more personal time, such as family time and others. Touching the fish is running away from your work. You might, touching the fish looks like spending time on your phone in the toilet and other places. How will this give you more family time? And finally, sit down. The government whip said that opposition has focused on changing the company and that we should instead focus on solving individual goals. Please understand that change will never happen to just yourself alone. Change must be done collectively for your employer to see that this is an actual matter that must be solved. Thus proving that change must happen collectively and on a large scale. It won't be effective if you alone try to get the outcome. In fact, even touching the fish is just simply another ineffective way of forcing collective change, not individual change. Collective change, please take note that collective change will also help you in the long term.
POI.
Sit down. On to the next part of my speech, I'll be answering a few relevant questions that will prove to you why we should win the debate. The first question is, which side better protects the interests of the workers and the employers as the main stakeholders in this debate? The government has showed you a one-sided solution which only sides to the workers, and even so it is an inefficient way. The opposition side, however, has shown you that through protest and by showing to their employers that they disagree with this toxic culture of work, this habit will change. It will benefit the employers as their working hours will be reduced.
POI before 6.
It will benefit the employees as their working hours will be reduced, and the employers as their company would face large losses as their workers aren't slacking off that much. The second question is, should young Chinese workers resist or comply with the demands of toxic work culture? As my teammate has previously said, we think that they should not comply with these toxic demands, and instead they should fight against these toxic demands. Rather than doing the touching the fish method, which isn't really effective, and you are sort of complying a bit with their toxic demands. On to the next part of my speech, both for comparisons. So in the government's world, laziness will be widespread, and more people will be spending their time doing in these illegal breaks rather than working their jobs. No actual change will happen. And even if we're charitable and say that even if change does happen, it will happen very slowly and it might take years for it to happen. In the opposition's world, instant change through direct protests aimed directly at employers will generate this change. Even at our worst, more people will unite to directly protest and fight against these bad employers, leading to eventual change. Now, onto this brief summary of the debate. We acknowledge the opening opposition stating that better outcomes can be achieved through protesting their employers. However, they failed to tell you how they should do it. An extension to this argument has been provided by my teammate previously in his speech. We as the closing opposition have given more method than the opening opposition and have disproved every argument given by the government. This is why we as the closing opposition should take this debate. With that, I am proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for the debate. With that ends this round. You guys can like literally cross the floor and like shake hand and say hi or anything. In the meanwhile, give me about 10 minutes to deliberate, and yeah, I'll just mute myself.